If my daughter hadn't insisted I wear that ridiculous smart bracelet, I wouldn't be here to tell you what happened the night my life almost ended in a room full of smiling people holding champagne flutes. It was supposed to be a celebration, my early departure from academia after nearly 3 decades of teaching history to college students who barely remembered what year the Civil War started. I wasn't retiring exactly. Not in the golf course and cruise kind of way. I was stepping down early, burned out from university politics and the quiet erasure of women like me who stopped being shiny after 50. My name is Dr. Lorraine Merrick, though only my former students still call me that. Most people just say Lorraine, except for my mother. She prefers the full title when introducing me as if she's the one who earned it. This is my daughter, Dr. Merrick. She teaches American history at Kenwick. Used to teach, I'd correct her. But that night, I didn't correct anyone. I was too busy trying not to let my jaw clench each time someone told me how proud they were. The venue was beautiful, I'll give her that. Tilda. My mother never did anything halfway. The chandeliers were real crystal imported, probably French. The room smelled like gardenias and wealth. And everyone in that room had been carefully selected by her, like china placed just so on a holiday table. Sadie, my daughter, kept checking her phone under the table, clearly uncomfortable among the sea of conservative haircuts and retired board members. I caught her eye and gave her a small smile. She returned it with the same expression she used to give me as a child during piano recitals, part encouragement, part, "This is almost over." Then my mother stood. She was wearing a silver-gray sheath dress that made her look like a senator's wife, and her lipstick hadn't smudged a millimeter since she arrived. In her left hand, she held a crystal flute of champagne. In her right hand was something else, shorter, heavier. A lowball glass, dark liquid, a slice of blood orange floating inside. She crossed the room with that smooth, intentional gait she'd perfected over years of making an entrance. "Lorraine," she said, holding out the dark glass. "This is yours. I brought it specially. You always said champagne gives you headaches." I hadn't said that, ever. But in that moment, I didn't question her. I smiled, took the glass, and thanked her. "Shall we toast?" she said, raising her flute high. The room quieted with practiced reverence. My mother never needed to tap a glass or raise her voice. People just listened to a life well lived, to sacrifice, to brilliance, and to knowing when to pass the torch. There was something in her voice, something syrupy and final that made the hairs on my arm rise. I lifted the glass, brought it to my nose. The scent hit me immediately. Not just the sweetness of orange peel and spice. Underneath that, a sharp medicinal note, something like cherry cough syrup, but bitter. I hesitated. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Sadie. She wasn't watching the toast, she was watching me. Then I did something I still don't fully understand. I smiled, tilted the glass just enough to touch my lips, but didn't sip. Not yet. The applause started. My mother clinked her glass against mine, her eyes scanning my face for a reaction. I set the drink down. 15 minutes later, I was thanking a retired dean for the kind words when my vision blurred. The floor tilted, my knees buckled, and then nothing. I woke up to fluorescent lights and the smell of antiseptic. My head felt like it had been split and sewn back together with thread dipped in static electricity. Machines beeped softly around me. Sadie was seated beside the bed holding a tablet. Her expression was calm, but her jaw was tight. I knew that look. It was the same one I wore for years while teaching under hostile department chairs. "You're awake," she said, setting the tablet down. "What happened?" I croaked. My throat felt raw. "You passed out. EMS got there fast." Because of the bracelet, she added, holding up her phone, it flagged a cardiac irregularity, called 911 on its own. "You should thank me for forcing you to wear it." I managed a smile. "I always do." She didn't smile back. "What was in the drink, Sadie?" Her silence told me everything. "We're waiting on tox results," she said eventually, but I smelled it too before they took it. It wasn't alcohol, at least not just alcohol. Your grandmother Sadie didn't answer, but the answer was there, in the way her eyes avoided mine, in the way her fingers fidgeted with the tablet as if something on the screen could explain what we both knew, but didn't want to say. "She said it was special," I murmured. brought just for me. Sadie nodded, and she made sure you drank it before the toast. The door opened and a nurse stepped in, cheerful but brisk. Vitals were checked, meds administered, more small talk, none of which I heard. My mind was looping, cycling through memories that suddenly took on a different color. The offhand comments, the insistence on planning the event herself. The way she smiled when she handed me the drink, too calm, too practiced. The way she said, "Pass the torch." That night in the hospital bed, I stared at the ceiling and thought about my mother's voice. Not the words, but the tone. She hadn't sounded proud. She'd sounded resolved. I wasn't sure what scared me more, the idea that she might have wanted to hurt me, or the idea that I had known somewhere deep down and still took the glass anyway. If I hadn't been wearing that bracelet, I might never have woken up again. And if that's true, if my mother handed me that drink, knowing what it contained, then this wasn't just a health scare. This was something else, something far darker. And this time, I wasn't going to brush it away with rationalizations or polite silence. This time, I was going to follow the instinct I'd spent my whole life learning to ignore. When I was 10 years old, my mother made me wear gloves to the grocery store. Not because it was cold, not because of germs, but because, as she explained, a Merrick girl's hands should always look composed. She said this while snapping a pearl button closed around my wrist. I remember staring at her as she adjusted the fit, her mouth tight with precision, her voice calm as a surgeon's. I didn't understand it then, but that was the moment I learned in our house appearances were everything. Truth came second, comfort came last. Lying in the hospital bed 2 days after the party, those gloves came back to me. I could still feel the texture of the fabric, thin, pointless, but required. Just like the retirement party. Except it wasn't retirement, not really. I'd stepped down early from my teaching post after a year of soul erosion. Committee meetings that ended in performative nods. Colleagues pretending I hadn't just said what I'd said. An administrative memo suggesting my teaching style might no longer align with student expectations. I wasn't even angry anymore, just done. The decision to leave had been mine, technically. But as with most things in my life, the pressure came from more than one direction. When I told my mother, she blinked twice, then said, "Of course, you've earned rest." Then, without asking, she began planning a gathering to honor your contributions to the field. I should have said no. But some small part of me, the girl still wearing gloves in aisle 7 of Calhoun's Market, hoped it might finally be different this time. I turned to Sadie, who had returned to the hospital room with 2 coffees and an expression that didn't match her age. At 26, she was already more composed than I'd been at 40. She handed me the cup without a word, then sat in the chair by the window, sunlight casting a warm glow across her dark navy blazer. Work clothes. She hadn't even taken a day off. "How's Grandma?" I asked. She sipped her coffee slowly, back at the house as if nothing happened. "I stopped by this morning. She was reorganizing the mantel, told me the centerpiece at the party was slightly off-center. Of course she did. She asked if you'd made up the collapse for attention. That landed like a stone, not because it was new, but because it was expected." Sadie stared into her cup. "She's not worried, Mom. She's annoyed. Like your medical emergency inconvenienced her narrative." "Sadie," I said gently, "you don't have to manage this. I know you've been in the middle your whole life." Her eyes flicked to mine. "I'm not in the middle, not anymore." There was a quiet finality in her voice that made me both proud and profoundly sad. Later that evening, after she left to catch up on casework, my best friend Elena stopped by. She brought Greek takeout and a stack of magazines, most of which neither of us opened. Elena and I had met during grad school, 2 women in a sea of competitive men with elbow patches and unspoken quotas. She'd gone on to write popular non-fiction books about women in politics. I'd taken the academic route and built a syllabus around silence, how history was shaped by what people didn't say. Ironic, really. She sat cross-legged in the hospital armchair, flipping the lid off a container of hummus. So she said casually, "Any word on what was in the drink?" Still waiting, I replied, "Talk screen's taking longer than expected. You're not actually thinking this was random, are you?" I hesitated. I don't know what to think. It could have been an interaction, a bad mix with that sleep aid I took the night before. Or Lorraine. Her voice was firm. Don't gaslight yourself. You smelled something. You felt something. And now you're here. I looked away. Elena leaned forward. Has it occurred to you that your mother might have done this on purpose? I couldn't answer. The question itself felt like a betrayal even after everything. She's always been like this, Elena continued. Subtle, performative cruelty wrapped in fine manners. I've seen it. The backhanded compliments, the guilt trips disguised as praise. I know. No, I mean, I've really seen it. Remember my book launch? I nodded. She told me you should have been the one on stage. Said I was charming but lacked academic rigor. I winced. And when I published that essay in The Atlantic, she asked if I was going to start writing tabloids next. Why didn't you tell me this before? Because I knew you'd defend her. Silence stretched between us, long and taut. Finally, Elena said whatever was in that glass, it wasn't just a drink, it was a statement. A nurse came in, checked my IV, and left. I stared at the empty corner of the room for a long time. Cambria would have known what to say. Or maybe she wouldn't. She'd always been the wild one, the soft one. The sister who dyed her hair red before school photos and cried during commercials. She died when I was 21, and she was 23. Officially, it was an overdose. Unofficially, it was mental health issues. That's what my mother always called it, as if sadness was a scandal that needed good PR. I hadn't thought about Cambria in months, but now lying in that sterile bed, I couldn't shake the image of her last year alive, her voice slower, her eyes foggier. She'd always been vibrant, but near the end she was blurry around the edges. I remembered one night 3 months before she died, when she told me she thought someone was slipping her something. She laughed when she said it, brushed it off. I hadn't believed her, or maybe I just didn't want to. Now I wasn't so sure. The scent stayed with me long after I left the hospital. Not the antiseptic air or the acrid tang of burned coffee from the nurse's station, but the memory of that glass in my hand. The drink my mother handed me. The cocktail meant just for me. It had looked harmless garnet red with a thin slice of blood orange resting like a secret at the bottom. But it hadn't smelled like celebration. It smelled like cherry syrup, like NyQuil left out overnight. Like something you might hide in a kitchen drawer labeled vitamins. Back home, I stood at the kitchen sink with my sleeves rolled up, scrubbing a mug I'd already washed twice. The window above the sink framed the tall birch trees behind the house, their bare branches tapping against the glass like long, patient fingers. I heard the front door open and close, Sadie punctual as always. I brought your discharge forms, she said, setting them on the counter. And some good coffee, not the hospital sludge. I dried my hands and took the cup she offered. It was hot, strong, and tasted like something real. I've been thinking, she said carefully. Do you remember what the drink smelled like? I paused. Yes, medicinal, bitter underneath the sweet. It reminded me of something from childhood, but I can't place it. Sadie nodded, pulling her phone from her coat pocket. That matches what I found. She swiped to open a photo, a zoomed-in image of the glass I'd held at the party taken from a still frame of the venue's security footage. In the image, the drink was already in my hand, but the camera angle caught something I hadn't noticed before my mother reaching into her handbag just moments before. A small amber bottle in her hand. Blink and you'd miss it. But there it was. Where did you get this? I asked. I asked the venue for camera access. Said we were looking into a guest's lost bracelet. They sent me the feed. I stared at the screen, heart heavy. It could be anything I said. Eye drops, perfume, hand sanitizer. Sadie's voice was gentle but firm. It could be, but you smelled something. And I saw her pour it into the glass. A long silence settled between us. She took a sip from her cup and watched me carefully, not pushing. I want to believe it was nothing I said finally, a moment, a mistake, but that scent. It was the same one Cambria used to describe right near the end. She said everything tasted like syrup. Sadie nodded slowly. I remember you told me that when I was little. I shouldn't have dismissed it. I didn't take her seriously. I thought it was the depression talking. You were 21, and she was unraveling. Everyone missed the signs. I looked out the window again, or maybe we didn't want to see them. Sadie leaned forward. Would you be open to me looking into this more formally? I raised an eyebrow. Formally, I mean discreetly. I have a friend who does tech investigations, mostly digital forensics and metadata work. He's helped with cases at the firm, and he's good. Do I want to know how good? Sadie smirked. He's not quite legal, but not quite not. I considered this. What's his name, Marcus? He's 30, but acts like he's 60. Lives off Red Bull and ethical gray zones. Sounds like a modern knight, more like a caffeine-fueled raccoon. I laughed for the first time in days. All right, I said. Let Marcus Raccoon away. She smiled, but I could see the resolve behind it, tight-focused. She wasn't going to let this go. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house was quiet, too quiet. I wandered through the hallway past the old bookshelf where Cambria's photo still sat in a silver frame, untouched for years. Her eyes were bright in the picture, caught mid-laughter, mouth open like she'd just said something funny and a little inappropriate. She wore her hair curly, then something our mother had hated. Too wild, she'd said. I stopped in front of the photo and touched the edge of the frame. I should have fought harder for you, I whispered. Cambria had always been softer, more sensitive. She painted, sang, off-key adopted stray animals. Our mother called her chaotic when what she meant was inconvenient. And when Cambria began to withdraw, when the sparkle dulled and her speech slowed, our mother said she needed discipline, not medication. I'd believed her. Now I wasn't so sure. The next morning, Sadie arrived with a small device in her hand, black square with a blinking green light. What is that? Your bracelet's data backup. Marcus extracted it. The health monitor tracks more than just heart rate. It has a low-level audio buffer, captures ambient sound in case of emergency replay. You're telling me my bracelet was recording only the 30 seconds before and after your collapse. I stared at the little cube, and it caught the toast. Sadie nodded. Want to hear it? I hesitated. Is there a way to not want to hear it and still find out what I need? She shook her head gently. She tapped the device. A moment of static. Then my mother's voice filled the kitchen, smooth and confident. To Lorraine, a woman of grace, of duty, of brilliance, may her next chapter be quieter, calmer, and may she finally rest from the storm. There was a slight clink of glass, applause, and then a whisper, almost under her breath but still caught. She'll thank me later. The recording clicked off. Sadie didn't speak, neither did I, because we both understood that wasn't a toast, that was a goodbye. The voice didn't leave me, not even after the audio clip stopped. It clung to the kitchen air like incense, my mother's toast, her quiet promise that I'd thank her someday. I didn't sleep that night. I barely moved. I just sat in the living room with the lights dimmed, listening to the heater kick on and off, thinking about Cambria's final months, how she started skipping meals, slurring her words, forgetting things she'd known cold. I used to chalk it up to her spiraling mental state. But what if it wasn't just that? What if someone helped her unravel? The next morning, Sadie arrived early. She looked rested, focused. Law had trained her to wear composure like armor. Still, I noticed the subtle details, a looser bun, no earrings, the faintest tremor in her coffee hand. I found someone, she said without preamble, someone who might have information about Cambria. I blinked. Sadie, it's been 30 years. She's a licensed psychologist, used to be a therapy intern at St. Bridges when Cambria was referred there. Her name's Dr. Nia Bartlett. I recognize the name from a few cases I worked on last year, patients fighting medical gaslighting claims. She's credible, and she remembers Cambria. How Sadie opened her tablet and turned the screen toward me. She wrote a blog post last fall about patients who were dismissed as hysterical in the 90s. She mentioned a young woman, artistic, erratic behavior, reported fogginess, inconsistent dosing from a parent. She didn't name her, but the timeline matches. I emailed her. She replied within an hour. She wants to talk. She agreed to a meeting. She said she always felt like that case ended too quietly. I hesitated. Do you trust her? Sadie's voice softened. She helped me once. Years ago, when you and Dad split. I never told you I didn't want to worry you, but I wasn't doing great back then. Dr. Bartlett saw me pro bono through a friend. She didn't fix me, but she listened, and she never minimized anything. I stared at my daughter so composed, so careful, and felt a pang of guilt for all the things I hadn't seen. I'm sorry, I said quietly. You don't need to be, Sadie said. But maybe now, we both stop apologizing for things we survived. We met Dr. Bartlett at a quiet corner cafe off 10th Avenue. She arrived 10 minutes early, already seated when we walked in, sipping a cup of chamomile tea like someone who never rushed even when she should. She was in her mid-40s, tall and lean, with thick black curls pulled back and a gaze that didn't flinch. Her voice was low and warm like weathered velvet. Lorraine, she said, standing, I'm honored to finally meet you. I remember your sister vividly. I thanked her, sat down slowly, and studied her face. There was no performative sympathy, no distance, just curiosity and a quiet, steady resolve. I didn't know Cambria was even in therapy, I said. She was referred to St. Bridget's by a family physician who noted cognitive changes and depressive episodes. I was just beginning my internship then. I wasn't assigned to her case directly, but I sat in on a few sessions with the attending. I was struck by how articulate she was, how grounded when her mother wasn't in the room. My breath hitched. Tilda came with her. She insisted on it, Dr. Bartlett said. At first, the attending allowed it, but after a few sessions, Cambria requested to speak privately. That's when things changed. Sadie leaned forward. How so? She became more paranoid. She told us she was taking supplements her mother gave her but didn't know what was in them. She said she felt foggy, like she was walking underwater. She mentioned strange dreams, losing time, and that her mother told her she was overthinking everything. I felt my stomach turn. Do you have notes? I asked. Dr. Bartlett nodded. Some. After the attending passed away, unexpectedly, stroke sudden, I requested to archive his files, but many were already boxed and sent to off-site storage. Years later, I requested access through the hospital system, but the files had been purged. Convenient, Sadie muttered. There was one line. Dr. Bartlett continued, reaching into her bag and pulling out a yellowed note card. I copied this. It stayed with me. Cambria said, she puts it in my tea, says it helps my moods, but I don't feel like myself anymore. I feel like wallpaper. My throat tightened. Wallpaper. That was something Cambria used to say when she felt ignored. I might as well be wallpaper, she told me once after a family dinner where Tilda praised my scholarship and ignored her art show win. At the time, I thought it was hyperbole. Now it felt like a warning I'd missed. What was the outcome of her file? I asked. Dr. Bartlett sighed. It was closed, officially marked as non-compliant patient, discontinued therapy. But she didn't discontinue, I said flatly. She died. Yes, she said quietly. And your mother never returned our calls. We sat in silence for a long moment. The cafe clatter around us felt far away. Finally, Sadie asked, would you be willing to testify if we opened a formal inquiry? Dr. Bartlett tilted her head. If you can show intent or a pattern, yes. But I'm not sure what court would reopen a decades-old death without physical evidence. We may have more than you think, Sadie said. When we left the cafe, the sky had turned the pale blue of early spring, and the wind smelled faintly of thawing soil. We walked in silence until we reached the car. I rested my hand on the door but didn't open it. She said I was like wallpaper, I murmured. Sadie didn't answer, but her eyes were wet. That night, I reread Cambria's old journal, the only thing of hers I'd kept all these years. Most pages were sketches or lyrics or half-finished poems. But near the back, scribbled in pencil, were 2 words underlined twice, don't drink. I stared at them for a long time, feeling their weight press into my chest like stones. My mother hadn't changed. She'd just become more careful. And this time, I was ready to stop being wallpaper. The envelope arrived on a Thursday. Thick ivory cardstock, no return address, my name, written in stiff calligraphy, as though it were a wedding invitation. For a moment, I just stared at it, a soft thrum rising in the base of my skull the way it had once done before committee meetings I knew would go badly. My fingers tingled before I even opened it. I already knew it was from her. I just didn't know what she wanted until I did. Sadie read over my shoulder in silence. The words were clear, clinical, and devastating: petition for temporary conservatorship, non-voluntary adult. Filed by Matilda Merrick, filed by my mother. She's claiming cognitive impairment. Sadie said, her voice clipped. Suggests you may be experiencing neurological after effects from your collapse, confused memory, paranoia, decision fatigue. She even mentions you forgetting dates and names. She always said I was forgetful when I disagreed with her, I murmured. Sadie kept reading. She's arguing you require temporary supervision for financial and medical decisions due to what she calls post-acute behavioral disorientation. And she submitted an affidavit from Dr. Baxton. I blinked. Baxton, that urgent care doctor she knows from Bridge Club. Sadie nodded. Not your neurologist, not your primary, just someone she knows who saw you once in passing and wrote a vague letter about recent observed decline. This is orchestrated. The room tilted slightly, not from illness, but from rage. My mother hadn't just dismissed me. She hadn't just tried to silence me with syrup and toast. She was trying to erase me on paper. She wants access to your medical decisions, power over your banking activity, and administrative control over your home until a full capacity assessment is completed. Sadie added, tapping the packet. She filed for expedited review. The hearing is in 10 days. I took the paper from her hands, stared at the black ink like it might rearrange itself if I glared hard enough. She didn't even ask. She doesn't think she has to, Sadie said softly. I sat down at the table and let the weight of it settle. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I heard Cambria's voice, dry, tired, whispering, "She never asks. She just takes." Later that afternoon, Elena came by with soup and sarcasm. She filed what she asked, nearly dropping her bag. I handed her the petition. She skimmed it quickly, eyes narrowing. "This is a power grab," she said flatly. "Not concern. Control. I know, she's weaponizing the legal system. You know how many women our age get trapped in conservatorships by people who claim to love them." Sadie nodded. "I've worked those cases. She's following the playbook. Starts with fabricated symptoms, adds a complicit physician, slips in language about safety and risk of financial exploitation. Then files before anyone has a chance to respond. She even included the hospital record," I said quietly. "Not the discharge summary, just the emergency notes when they thought it might be a fainting spell." She cherry-picked, Elena said. "This is what she does. She curates reality like it's a museum exhibit. The worst part wasn't the petition itself. It was how familiar it felt, how I'd spent years ignoring the small erasures the narrative reshaping. This wasn't new, it was just finally visible. That night, I sat with Sadie in the study, watching her draft a formal objection. She moved with quiet confidence, her fingers typing methodically the way I used to grade term papers, calm, controlled, relentless. "I'm requesting an immediate counter-evaluation," she said. "From a neurologist we choose. We'll submit your full medical history, including cognitive assessments. I'll also file a motion to challenge the emergency hearing as overreach. Will the court listen if we move fast? Yes. She's not your caregiver. You live independently. You pay your own bills. She'll have to prove actual risk, and she doesn't know we have other evidence." Sadie paused, then added quietly, "We may need to bring up Cambria." I nodded slowly. I've already brought her up in my mind 100 times. She deserves a voice in this. Even posthumously. In the quiet that followed, I remembered something from years ago, a moment I hadn't thought about in decades. I was 15. Cambria had been grounded for missing curfew. She swore she'd been at a friend's, but our mother wouldn't hear it. That night, I found Cambria curled up in the linen closet, crying silently into a pillow. "She's never going to believe me," she whispered. Even if I show her the truth. I'd wanted to say something reassuring, but all I managed was, "Then we have to believe each other." Maybe that was what this was now, a long overdue belief. In each other. In ourselves. 3 days later, the court acknowledged our objection. A neutral evaluator was appointed. I passed every test memory recall executive function, reasoning without hesitation. The psychologist even remarked that I seemed mentally sharper than most 51-year-olds she saw. Meanwhile, Tilda continued sending messages through Sadie. She just wants to help. She's worried about your future. She believes you're being influenced. She means me, Sadie said, after hanging up from one of those calls. She thinks I've filled your head with paranoia. You haven't, I told her. You've cleared it. On the morning, the court set the final hearing date. A courier delivered another envelope, this one smaller. Inside was a handwritten card from Tilda in her neat, angular script. Lorraine, I never wanted this to get ugly, but you're not well. You haven't been for some time. Let me take care of things the way I've always done. You'll feel better not having to worry. Trust me. Mother. I stared at the last line for a long time. Let me take care of things the way I've always done. That was the problem. That's exactly what I was trying to escape. For weeks that night had replayed in my mind like a scratched vinyl record, jagged looping, always skipping, just before the truth. I remembered the glint of the glass, the faint bitterness of cherry syrup, the applause echoing through the venue, and then the cold floor rising up to meet me. What I didn't remember was what had been said right before I blacked out. But someone else had been listening, or rather, something else. Let's try the bracelet again, Sadie said, tapping her laptop. She'd been digging through the companion app tracking timestamps and metadata. It auto-records audio when there's a sudden drop in vitals. Most people don't even know it does that. She clicked a small triangle on screen. A soft, static hiss filled the room. Then voices muffled clinks of glass, scattered laughter, and finally hers. Tilda's voice. To rest, finally. To letting go. You've worked so hard, it's time to let others take over. My breath caught. I hadn't heard it that clearly before. Her tone was syrupy gentle in that way only those who've mastered passive cruelty can manage. The kind of softness you'd use before suffocating a songbird. She was toasting my surrender, I said almost to myself. Sadie didn't speak. She let the recording continue. You deserve peace, Lorraine, Tilda went on. You've always pushed so hard, always had something to prove, but that need, it can cloud your judgment. A pause. The unmistakable clink of a bottle cap. That's why I brought this. Something special, something soothing. Just for you. Then the sound of liquid pouring. And my voice faint and hesitant. What's in it, Tilda? Just a little help. Click. The file ended there. Sadie looked at me. She drugged your drink, and the bracelet heard her admit it. We sat in silence for a long moment. It wasn't just the evidence, it was the familiarity, the way Tilda could thread domination through comfort. I'd heard that tone before, when she convinced Cambria to drop out of art school, when she told me I was the stable one, the fixer, when she claimed Cambria was too fragile to make her own choices. Sadie scrubbed backward, replayed the moment Tilda said, just a little help. It's such a mild phrase, I said. But it's always been her weapon. I'm submitting this, Sadie said, as part of our response, along with the footage and medical records, but we need to prepare for escalation. She'll deny it. She might, Sadie replied. Or she'll say it was a joke, a metaphor, but this isn't just implication. This is intent. She planned that toast like a performance. The next morning, Marcus arrived again, fresh coffee in hand, and a restless energy that reminded me of a graduate student on deadline. He helped Sadie extract the original audio log directly from the bracelet's firmware. It's time-stamped, authenticated by biometric triggers, he explained. That'll make it admissible, not just hearsay. He glanced at me. You okay listening to it again? No, I answered honestly. But I need to. We played it back this time through a clearer channel. The clarity of her voice was uncanny, too smooth, too measured, like someone narrating her own innocence. When the phrase, time to let others take over, rang out again, Marcus looked up. That's not a retirement toast, he said. That's a eulogy. Sadie turned to me, her face unreadable. She didn't want you retired. She wanted you removed. The weight of that settled in my chest like wet concrete. I think she genuinely believes it's mercy, I said slowly. She did it with Cambria too, under the guise of protection. Sadie nodded, except Cambria never got a second chance. That night, I lay awake in bed with the bracelet still on my wrist. I looked at it, at its unassuming plastic shell, its quiet, pulsing light, and thought about how much it had seen, how it had listened when I couldn't remember how it had recorded what my body had felt, even when my mind couldn't name it. It had heard her, and it had told the truth. I reached for my journal and scribbled a sentence I hadn't dared write before she tried to silence me. But this time I came with proof. As I put the pen down, I remembered something I'd tucked away for decades, a thin envelope buried in a book from grad school. Cambria's old copy of The Bell Jar, its spine broken from use, its pages soft from years of turning. There had been a letter inside, one I hadn't dared read since the day I found it. Tomorrow, I thought. Tomorrow I'll open it. And maybe for the first time in years, I'll hear Cambria too. But 100 words. It was still dark when I padded into the hallway, the house silent except for the soft hum of the fridge and the creak of old wood beneath my feet. I hadn't slept. Not really. The bracelet still pulsed faintly on my wrist, but tonight it wasn't what kept me awake. It was the memory of that envelope I hadn't dared open for nearly 30 years. The letter. Cambria had slipped it inside her favorite copy of The Bell Jar, one she'd carried in and out of college dorm rooms like it was a sacred text. I had inherited the book after her death, or rather after the quiet erasure of her life that followed. The kind of death that's never named fully in polite company. Just grief behind shut doors, therapy visits with no resolution, and a mother who told anyone who asked that Cambria was too delicate for this world. I found the book in a plastic storage bin in the attic, wrapped in a scarf that still faintly smelled of lilac and clove. The pages fell open naturally to the middle, the weight of paper long ago trained by the letter hidden there. It was folded once neatly, the kind of fold you make when you mean for something to be found. Her handwriting hadn't changed, loose loopy cursive with little hearts instead of dots on the eyes. My throat tightened at the sight of it. I sat on the floor, legs crossed, the letter in my lap. My fingers hovered for a moment, then opened the page. Lorraine, I know you don't want to hear this. You're always the one who tells me to stick it out. Be reasonable, don't make things harder than they already are. But I need you to know I'm not being dramatic. Mom's been giving me something. She says it's for anxiety, for focus. But it makes me slow. Foggy. I forget words. I forget how long it's been since I last went outside. She watches me now like I'm something she's trying to fix or break, I can't tell. She says I'm almost better. But I don't feel better. I feel erased. I tried flushing the pills. She found out. She said I wasn't grateful for her help. Lorraine, I think she's trying to make me disappear the way she wanted, quietly. If I vanish, it wasn't because I was weak. It's because I couldn't keep fighting someone who calls it love. Love Cambria. I didn't realize I was crying until I felt a drop hit the page. It blurred the ink just slightly, like the words themselves were dissolving. I clutched the letter to my chest, rocking once, twice like I had when I was a child, and afraid to sleep alone. For all these years, I'd let myself believe Cambria had slipped, fallen into some emotional chasm that I couldn't reach her from, that she'd been too fragile, too disordered, too something. But she hadn't fallen. She had been pushed, silenced, slowly, just as I nearly had been. Tilda had used the same script on me, different tools, same language. You've always worked so hard. Let someone else take care of things. Just a little help. It wasn't concern. It was containment. Later that morning, Sadie found me in the kitchen, still in pajamas, Cambria's letter open on the table between us. She didn't speak at first, just sat down, slowly reading every word. When she finished, she reached for my hand. She knew, I said. She knew what was happening, and she tried to warn me. Sadie nodded, and she trusted you would eventually hear her. We sat in silence for a long moment. Then she said quietly, "We can include this, Mom, as a pattern of coercive behavior, as evidence." I looked down at the page. It's not a legal document, no, but it's testimony. And if she gave it to you, it means she meant it to matter. I folded the letter carefully and slid it into a plastic sleeve. We'll use it. That afternoon, I went to Cambria's old studio, the one room in the house that had never quite been repurposed. It still smelled faintly of paint thinner and linseed oil. The canvases were stacked in the corner, some of them unfinished, others chaotic and bright. She'd always painted in layers, starting with soft pastels, before slashing reds and blacks through the image, like she was trying to expose what was hidden underneath. I hadn't looked at them properly in years. But now I saw them differently, not just as art, but as warnings. Emotions rendered in brushstrokes. Pain she couldn't say out loud. One canvas in particular caught my eye. It had a single red chair in the center of the frame, surrounded by silhouettes in soft gray all turned away. The title on the back, written in pencil, The Good Daughter. I traced the edge of the frame and whispered, "I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner." As I turned to leave, I noticed something else, a small notebook tucked behind a drawer of brushes. Cambria's sketch journal. I opened it gently, flipping past illustrations of faces and flowers and spirals until I found a page. With just one sentence, I stopped speaking the day I realized no one was listening to what I actually meant. Sadie found me there an hour later, the journal in my lap. "I didn't know this room still had power," she said gently. "She was screaming in here," I said. "We just thought she was painting." Sadie sat beside me. "We're going to make her heard." The next day, we added Cambria's letter and journal quote to the evidentiary packet for the upcoming hearing. Sadie filed it under a new section, Historical Pattern of Psychological Coercion, Secondary Victim Testimony. It was clean, clinical, admissible. But for me, it wasn't about the court anymore. It was about restoration. Cambria's voice wouldn't vanish in a drawer again. It would echo through the letter, the painting, and through me. That night, I left the studio door open. I wanted her presence in the house again. And for the first time in decades, I let myself say her name out loud. Not as an absence, not as a tragedy, just Cambria, as if she might answer. 1,000 words, Tilda suggested mediation. She made the offer through her attorney, an older man with soft eyes and a voice like chamomile tea, clearly chosen to project warmth. "Your mother wishes to resolve this matter privately, Lorraine. She believes too much pain has already been aired in court filings." Pain, that was her word for it. Not abuse, not gaslighting, not the quiet suffocation of 2 daughters across 30 years. Just pain, as though she were merely one of its unfortunate witnesses. Sadie was wary. She doesn't mediate, she maneuvers. But my attorney, Angela Sharp and steady, said the offer could be strategic. If she slips up even once, we can admit it. Recordings are legal in this state as long as one party consents. Sadie smiled at that. Then I'll be the party that consents. The meeting was set for a Tuesday at 3 p.m. in a conference room with stale coffee and too many fake plants. I arrived early, heart-hammering the letter from Cambria folded neatly in my purse, though I had no plan to show it. I just needed it near me, like armor. Tilda swept in precisely on time. Chanel blazer pearls, an air of dignified exasperation. She greeted the mediator like an old friend and gave me a cool nod, her voice syrupy. "Lorraine, you look rested. I'm so relieved you're feeling more like yourself." It was theater, of course, always had been. The mediator, a woman named Paula, mid-40s, calm to a fault, invited us to sit. "We're here to explore compromise. No pressure, just clarity." Tilda folded her hands. "Clarity is what I want truly. I never meant to cause distress. My concern has always been for Lorraine's well-being. Anyone would worry after such a frightening collapse." "She didn't collapse," Sadie said. "She was drugged." Tilda offered a wounded smile. "Oh, Sadie, you've always been so passionate." Sadie didn't flinch. She tapped her pen lightly once. The signal, her phone sitting beside her notepad, was recording. "I understand you believe I acted improperly," Tilda said, turning to me, "and I'm sorry you felt that way. But I assure you, I only wanted to ease your transition. You've worked so hard for so long. To make room," I said, quoting her. "Yes," Tilda replied, nodding, "to make room for rest, for reflection. You deserve that." I stared at her, suddenly remembering something Cambria had written in her journal. She calls it love when what she means is obedience. Sadie leaned in. What about Cambria? Tilda's face stilled, just for a moment. A pause too calculated to be grief. She was sensitive, Tilda said, too idealistic. The world was too harsh for her. She wrote that you gave her pills. That's absurd. Tilda's smile hardened. She was unwell. You can't rewrite history. Sadie pulled out a small folder and slid it across the table. Her handwriting, her words, not history testimony. Tilda didn't touch the folder. She exhaled slowly, then said, You don't understand what it's like. Being a mother means making impossible decisions. It means holding your children's lives together while they fall apart. Cambria was slipping, and Lorraine has always been on the edge. My stomach turned. That's not concern, I said. That's control. You'll understand someday, Tilda said, turning to Sadie. It's not easy. Keeping control, holding the line. Her voice was calm, unshaken. She didn't even realize what she'd said. Sadie clicked her pen. Thank you, she said softly. That's all we needed. Tilda blinked. What, you just admitted it, Sadie said. In front of a mediator, in a room where one participant consented to record. Tilda's veneer cracked just slightly, a twitch of the mouth, the slightest flare of nostrils. You tricked me. No, Sadie replied. You revealed yourself. We just made sure someone was listening. The mediator cleared her throat, suddenly very still. Angela stood, collected the folder, and nodded to me. I think we're done here. Tilda didn't move. She just stared at me like I'd betrayed her. Like I had turned on the system that had kept me safe and silent for so long. I loved you, she said. No, I replied. You managed me, but you never let me live. We walked out into the parking lot where the air felt brighter, sharper. Sadie exhaled deeply and squeezed my shoulder. That's it, she said. We've got her. That night I played the audio again. Just that one moment. Cambria just couldn't cope. She needed to go. And Lorraine, she's halfway there already. You'll understand when you're a mother. It's not easy keeping control. It wasn't a slip. It was doctrine, her worldview, spoken aloud at last. As I turned off the recording, I realized something strange. I didn't feel victorious. I felt free, because for the first time, I had proof I hadn't imagined it. I hadn't been paranoid. I hadn't overreacted. I had survived something real. And now the court would hear it too. 200 words. The courtroom wasn't as grand as I expected. No sweeping mahogany panels or echoing silence, just a modest chamber with beige walls, buzzing fluorescent lights, and a judge with tired eyes who had likely seen too many families tear each other apart before lunch. Still, as I stepped through the double doors, something shifted inside me. This was no longer about subtle tones or hidden jabs. Today, everything would be said out loud. Tilda sat already positioned at the front table, dressed in gray wool and pearls, every strand of her hair perfectly in place. Her posture was serene, expression as maternal. Her attorney, Mr. Raymond, leaned in to murmur something, and she offered a practiced nod. The whole tableau was rehearsed like she was playing the part of a heartbroken mother forced into legal action. Sadie squeezed my hand as we walked past her. She still thinks her image will save her. Angela, my attorney, looked calm but fierce. Let her underestimate us. That's how we win. The judge, Hanyun Margaret C. Talbot, entered and called the session to order. This hearing regards the emergency petition for limited conservatorship of Lorraine Merrick filed by Matilda Merrick, citing neurological impairment and diminished capacity. Ms. Merrick, she looked toward me. Do you wish to respond with counsel? I do, Your Honor. Angela stood. My client not only contests the petition, but submits evidence that suggests a pattern of psychological coercion and deliberate misrepresentation by the petitioner. Tilda didn't flinch. We began with the collapse. Sadie submitted the emergency report, the health bracelet logs, and a full medical breakdown. Marcus had provided a certified interpretation confirming elevated levels of a sedative compound inconsistent with any prescription I'd been taking. Angela narrated each point, calmly letting the facts speak louder than outrage. Then came the audio. Angela played the bracelet recording first, The courtroom, half filled with observers and law students, fell into a deep stillness. You've worked so hard. It's time to let others take over. What's in it? Just a little help. The judge leaned forward, slightly brows tight. Your Honor. Angela said we believe this toast was not celebratory, but a veiled attempt to incapacitate Ms. Merrick under the guise of care. Tilda's attorney objected. The phrasing is open to interpretation. Metaphorical, not material evidence of harm. Then let's interpret this, Angela said. She tapped the laptop and played the next clip, Sadie's recording from mediation. Cambria just couldn't cope. She needed to go. And Lorraine, she's halfway there already. You'll understand when you're a mother, it's not easy keeping control. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Tilda, for the first time, looked rattled. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. Angela let the silence hang before speaking again. Your Honor, these statements were made voluntarily in a setting offered by the petitioner. They indicate not only intent, but a worldview rooted in domination disguised as maternal concern. Mr. Raymond tried to push back. These are edited sound bites. Emotional manipulation. Judge Talbot raised a hand. Mr. Raymond, I'll decide what constitutes emotional manipulation. Next came Cambria's letter. I hadn't wanted to bring it, but Sadie was right. Cambria had entrusted it to me. It deserved to be heard. I stood to read it aloud. Lorraine, Mom's been giving me something. She says it's for anxiety. But I don't feel better. I feel erased. I think she's trying to make me disappear the way she wanted, quietly. The courtroom was still again. I felt every word in my mouth like stones I'd been carrying for years. When I finished, I sat down slowly. Angela introduced Dr. Nia Bartlett, who testified about her mentor's notes, how he had once treated Cambria, how those files had vanished after his death, how Cambria's treatment had likely involved off-the-books medication provided by a non-medical party. Tilda shook her head once, as if in disbelief. But she didn't speak. The final witness was me. Angela asked only one question. Ms. Merrick, what do you want the court to understand about the nature of your relationship with the petitioner? I looked directly at Judge Talbot. I was never the daughter she raised. I was the daughter she sculpted, polished, controlled. For years, I thought that made me strong. But now I see it made me invisible. Every decision I made had her voice behind it. Every achievement came with strings. When I began pulling away, she didn't let go. She tightened her grip. I paused, steadying my voice. She tried to erase Cambria by medicating her. When that wasn't enough, she erased her memory instead. She tried to erase me too, just slower, more gently, through praise, through exhaustion, through fear. I met Tilda's eyes then, but I'm still here, and I remember everything. When I finished, the courtroom was silent. Even Mr. Raymond didn't object. Judge Talbot called a recess before issuing her ruling. Outside in the hallway, I sat beside Sadie, my hands trembling. Do you think it was enough? You didn't just tell the court, she said. You told every woman in that room who's ever been quietly silenced by someone who said it was for their own good. 20 minutes later, we were called back in. Judge Talbot didn't waste time. This court finds the petition for limited conservatorship to be not only unsubstantiated, but rooted in a pattern of coercion and emotional manipulation. Petition denied. Furthermore, I am ordering a psychiatric evaluation of Ms. Matilda Merrick to determine her fitness for guardianship responsibilities in any future capacity. Tilda gasped. It was the first sound she'd made in hours. The judge banged her gavel. Court adjourned. I didn't cry, I didn't cheer, I simply stood and walked out into the sunlight. Because something had changed. I hadn't won back my freedom. I had claimed it for the first time. 1,000 words. The diagnosis came in a sealed envelope, as if it were meant to be unwrapped in private like grief or old secrets. The court had ordered a psychological evaluation following the hearing, and now it was official. A report stamped and signed. Matilda Merrick, narcissistic personality disorder with obsessive controlling traits. It wasn't a surprise, not really, but seeing it in black and white made the air feel heavy. Like the final stone being laid on a monument I hadn't asked to build. Angela handed me the folder gently. This will remain on record. It means she won't be granted legal guardianship over anyone ever again. I nodded, but the knot in my stomach didn't ease. Does she know she does? And she's not taking it well. Tilda had refused recommended treatment, called the evaluation misogyny wrapped in psychology, and accused the court of attacking strong women for being decisive. That word. Her favorite cloak. She doesn't believe it, I said. She doesn't have to, Angela replied. We do. But belief was harder than it looked. I'd built my entire emotional architecture on the idea that she was brilliant, that she'd sacrificed for us, that her controlling nature was a symptom of love, not something far more corrosive. To admit otherwise felt like retroactively unraveling my whole life, like pulling the thread on a tapestry I'd spent 5 decades weaving. At home, I moved through rooms like a ghost, pausing by framed photos and hearing her voice echo in them. Stand up straight, Lorraine. You'll thank me later. If I don't keep you focused, who will? It wasn't cruelty in the traditional sense. It was erosion, slow, invisible, constant. Elena came by with soup and silence. She was good at both. She fought dirty, she said, setting down the bowls. But you fought harder. I don't feel strong, I feel hollow. That's the cost, she said. You spent years becoming what she needed you to be. Now you have to figure out who you are when she's not scripting you. I thought about that long after she left. That word, scripting. I'd never said it out loud, but it was exactly right. Every promotion I'd accepted, every apology I'd offered, every deflection I'd made, Tilda had written the stage directions. I had merely delivered the lines. So I started therapy. It wasn't a dramatic decision, just a quiet one. I sat across from a woman named Dr. Eileen Rhodes, kind but unflinching, and told her I didn't know how to grieve someone I still couldn't completely hate. We talked about parentification, the process of becoming the emotional caregiver to a parent, of replacing your own needs with their survival. We talked about hypervigilance, the constant scanning for mood shifts, the invisible labor of anticipating emotional weather. We talked about what it meant to be praised as reliable, brilliant, so mature for your age, and how those compliments were sometimes just veiled forms of theft. And we talked about Cambria. One session, I brought in her sketchbook. Dr. Rhodes flipped through it slowly, pausing at the image of the red chair surrounded by shadowy figures. She felt alone in the spotlight, she said. But not seen. She wasn't fragile, I whispered. She was loud in the only language she was allowed to use. Dr. Rhodes looked at me, kind eyes steady, and now she's being heard. Weeks passed. The legal noise died down. Tilda retreated no longer, calling no letters yet, just silence so loud it felt like sound. I didn't miss her voice. But I missed the structure of having someone to prove wrong. One morning, I took off the bracelet, not in defiance, not in fear, just peace. It sat on the nightstand like a relic from another lifetime, a quiet witness that had once spoken louder than I could. When Sadie came over later that day, she noticed immediately. No bracelet, no need. She smiled. That's big. I know. We sat on the back porch watching birds land in the feeder. I asked how her wedding planning was going. She talked about flowers and playlists and a dress she wasn't sure about. Then she said something that stuck with me. You know, when I was younger, I thought strength looked like silence, like being unfazed. Now I think it looks like naming what hurt you and still choosing to heal anyway. I didn't answer. I just reached over and took her hand. That night, I journaled. It wasn't a retirement. It was an escape. And now, finally, I'm beginning. 1,000 words. The email came from a senior editor at Her Frame, a women's magazine I'd read for years, but never imagined being part of. The subject line was simple. Would you consider writing about your mother? Sadie had submitted a short note months earlier after the conservatorship case was dismissed. Just a paragraph really about mothers who silence daughters in the name of protection. She hadn't told me. I thought they'd ignore it, she said. I just wanted someone to know what you survived. The editor's message was kind, direct. We believe your story speaks to something deeply generational. So many women, especially in their 40s to 60s, have navigated complicated relationships with powerful mothers. If you're willing to write, we're willing to give you space. I sat with the idea for days. Writing it down felt permanent. It felt like naming something out loud in front of strangers. But more than that, it felt like finally choosing to tell my version of the story, not the one Tilda had built for me over a lifetime. So I wrote. I titled the piece, Leaving a Mother Who Stayed Too Long in My Mind. The opening line came to me in the middle of the night. Some daughters are born into a script handed the role of savior secretary or stand-in. I was all three. I wrote about growing up in a house where love was conditional on obedience, where being praised meant being sculpted into someone quieter, more polished, more useful. I wrote about Cambria, about the pills, about the painting with the red chair. I wrote about the toast, the bracelet, the courtroom. And I wrote about the strange relief of discovering I'd been manipulated, not because I wanted to stay in pain, but because naming the pattern helped dissolve it. But most of all, I wrote about the silence between us, the words I never got from Tilda, the apology that never arrived, the love that always came wrapped in strings. The piece was published online first, then in print a month later. The cover story was about midlife reinvention, but my article sat in the center of the issue, tucked between essays on caregiving and identity after 50. Within days, my inbox filled with messages from women I didn't know. This is my mother. I thought it was just me. I've been afraid to say it out loud my whole life. Thank you for giving me the words. Some were angry, some were shaking, some were quiet but steady, like they had finally exhaled after years of holding their breath. One woman wrote, I'm 63, and I just cut off contact with my mother 2 weeks ago. Your article made me feel like I didn't have to apologize for wanting peace. I cried reading that one, because that's what I had wanted all along. Not revenge, not vindication, just permission to stop negotiating with a version of love that demanded my disappearance. Sadie called the night the magazine hit stores. You're a writer now. I laughed. I guess I am. You gave it shape, she said. The mess, the pain, the history. You shaped it into something that can't be twisted anymore. That weekend, she brought over her wedding binder full of fabric swatches, guest lists, and potential menus. She looked tired but happy. We finally picked a date, she said. Next June. Lakeside. I was thinking, I want you to officiate. I blinked. You want me to... She nodded. You gave me the courage to leave a lifetime of pleasing behind. That deserves more than a toast. That deserves a place at the center. We hugged long and hard. Somewhere between the tears and the laughter, I realized something had shifted permanently. Not just in how I saw Tilda, but in how I saw myself. I wasn't just the daughter who survived her mother. I was the woman who rewrote the ending. A week later, I received a card in the mail from one of the Her Frame readers. Handwritten floral border, the kind of thing my mother might have sent in another life. It ended with the line, "We were raised to be quiet. Thank you for speaking in full volume." I kept the card on my desk right beside a photo of Cambria paint on her cheeks, laughing mid-sentence. I never got a letter from my mother, not the kind that said, "I see you. I'm sorry. I was wrong." But I got this instead words from strangers, yes, but also sisters, daughters, women who had walked similar roads and could finally name them. And somehow, that was enough. Because the letter I never got, I just wrote it for myself. 1,000 words. The envelope arrived on a Wednesday. No return address, no postmark, just my name printed in the unmistakable looping cursive that had signed every permission slip, every birthday card, every veiled threat disguised as affection. Lorraine. I stared at it for hours before opening it, left it on the counter beside a bowl of oranges, then moved it to the desk, then to my nightstand like its meaning might change depending on where it sat. But it didn't. It was still from her. When I finally opened it, the paper was thick, the kind reserved for wedding invitations or formal regrets. The ink was navy blue, a color she had once said was dignified without being showy. The letter began with her trademark detachment. Lorraine, I imagine this finds you well, though I'm sure you would not want me to imagine anything about you at all these days. Still, a mother never fully stops thinking of her child, no matter the circumstances. I read it slowly, careful not to react too soon. I've had a great deal of time to reflect. The people here are kind, but patronizing. They mistake quiet for submission, which of course it never has been. I wonder if that's something we have in common. I've read about the article. Several copies were sent to me. I suppose I should congratulate you. You've always had a gift for words, though you were never particularly interested in my advice when it came to tone. There it was. Even in writing, especially in writing, Tilda couldn't resist the edge of critique wrapped in what she'd call insight. You seem to believe I was cruel. I won't dispute your feelings. I understand the world is full of daughters now who need to name their mothers as the source of all their suffering in order to feel liberated. That's a fashion I never quite caught on to. Perhaps that's my flaw. But I do want you to know I loved you. I may not have known how to show it the way you wanted, but I protected you. From weakness. From chaos. From becoming your sister. I stopped. My chest tightened. Even now, she couldn't let Cambria be remembered on her own terms. She had to be a warning, a lesson, an argument. I will not write again. This is not a plea for reconciliation. I know where I stand, but don't mistake my silence for guilt. I sleep quite well, all things considered. You've always mistaken discomfort for wrongdoing. I suppose this is just to say, you think you've won, but I was only ever trying to protect you. No signature, just a blank space where her name might have been. A vanishing act in ink. I folded the letter once, then again, then slid it back into the envelope. I didn't tear it, didn't throw it out. I simply placed it in the drawer beside my bed, the one that held Cambria's sketchbook and a handful of photographs I hadn't yet decided how to feel about. When Sadie came over later that evening, I handed her the envelope without a word. She read it in silence, jaw tightening as she went. When she finished, she looked up and said, "She never really got it, did she?" "No," I said, "but I think that's the point. I don't need her to anymore." There was freedom in that. Not the cinematic kind where violins swell and tears fall. Just a quiet untethering, like finally cutting a string you hadn't realized was still looped around your wrist. I went for a walk that night, the first cool one of the season. The leaves had begun to change, and the air smelled like burnt wood and possibility. I passed a woman walking her dog, a couple, laughing over coffee in to-go cups, a boy on a bike too small for him, but riding like he owned the road. None of them knew who I used to be. That was the gift. The world doesn't stop spinning when your mother no longer defines you. It spins quieter, clearer. The next morning, I pulled out a sheet of my own stationery, the kind I'd bought but never used. I didn't address it to anyone. I just wrote, "Letting go doesn't always look like forgiveness. Sometimes it's just peace." I tore it out, folded it gently, and slid it under Cambria's portrait on the bookshelf. Not because she needed it, but because I did. What? 100 words. 6 months later, I found myself standing in front of a dry erase board, holding a marker, and asking a room full of adults, what does history leave out? It was the first night of a community education course I'd designed, Women's Narratives in American History. Most of my students were women in their 50s and 60s, a few retired, a few starting over. One wore a necklace with her granddaughter's name on it. Another had purple streaks in her hair. They were all here not for credit, not for careers, but for something quieter, voice memory, reclamation. When I first pitched the course, the program director asked why I wanted to teach it. I'd said, because I've spent too long letting someone else tell my story. Now I stood there watching them scribble ideas onto index cards, their pens moving, like they were rewriting something they'd been told to forget. After class, one of them, Judith, mid-60s former nurse, lingered. "I just wanted to say," she said, clutching her bag to her chest, "your article, the one about your mother, it made me realize I don't have to answer every call just because it comes from a woman who gave birth to me." I nodded. We didn't need to say more. That weekend was Sadie's wedding. A quiet lakeside gathering, small by most standards, but it felt big in every way that mattered. Sunlight filtered through the pines like permission, and the water behind us shimmered with a kind of stillness that made you believe beginnings could be gentle. Sadie wore a tea-length dress with embroidered sleeves and bare feet. Her partner Jordan beamed the way people do when they know they've chosen the person who will guard their solitude and celebrate it at once. When it was my turn to speak, not as mother of the bride, but as the officiant, I looked out at the faces before me, and then down at the words I'd written just in case my voice betrayed my heart. I used to think inheritance was money or property or heirloom china no one wanted. But over time, I've learned we pass on other things too. Stories, wounds, ways of surviving. And sometimes, if we're lucky, we get to pass on something better. Something like self-trust. Or the freedom to become someone no one ever imagined you could be. Sadie squeezed Jordan's hand, eyes wet, smile steady. I took a breath and said, to choosing the lives our mothers couldn't imagine. To freedom that doesn't need permission. Later, as dusk folded into night and string lights danced over clinking glasses, I wandered toward the lake, away from the music and the small talk, toward the sound of crickets and the hush of wind in leaves. I sat on a wooden bench, still in my dress shoes, and listened to nothing for a while. Then, instinctively, I reached for my wrist. Empty. The bracelet hadn't been there in weeks. And yet, my body remembered the weight. Or maybe it remembered what it had once meant. Surveillance, safety, fear. I didn't need it anymore. Not because I was cured, not because the damage had vanished, but because I no longer lived in a house where danger wore pearls and spoke in measured tones. I now lived in a world I chose. In that quiet, I thought of Cambria. Not her death, but her laughter mid-sentence, her paint-streaked hands, the way she used to hum without knowing. For the first time in years, I didn't feel guilty for surviving her. I felt lucky to carry what she didn't get to finish. Before heading back to the party, I whispered one last thing to the trees and the water and the version of me who had once begged for her mother's approval like oxygen. I'm not scared of being unseen anymore. And I meant it.